Well, here's a surprise update for 40k. A lot of errata changes and FAQs, assorted things like that. A time for Games Workshop to say, mistakes? What mistakes? There was an update, you only had to look for them on the Warhammer community tab, and then look at all of the new and recent changes. Maybe there were mistakes, who's to say? Definitely not the vampire who carries on looking at all the mistakes the Games Workshop's done. There are still lots of errors and problems and things with 40k. And you'll find that in this assortment of documents, some of the changes are not really changes. Like for the Munitorum Field Manual update, they removed the index Space Wolf points. That is why the document has gone from 39 pages to 38 pages. There are no other changes. Not even to the incredibly cheap Imperial Knights. Mainly what you will want to do is look at the Warhammer community website, look at the downloads tab for Warhammer 40,000 and look through and see if any of your factions are affected. Read the FAQ document and see what it is. I'll go through some of them that have taken my eye. There is an FAQ on Overwatch to say it does count as you targeting the closest eligible unit for things like aggressors getting an extra point of armor penetration if they target the closest eligible enemy. You can only target one enemy with Overwatch, so that target immediately becomes the closest eligible unit. Aggressor's Flamers are confirmed to be one of the best weapons to use for Overwatch. The new Chaos Cabal of Sorcerers detachment had a change to say, oh yeah, you know that enhancement you can get to make a character a sorcerer? You can't make a Khorne character a sorcerer. Or Psyker. They can't be a Psyker. That doesn't match with Khorne's vibe. The Codex Necrons update is to say that a Crypto Thrall that's used the Systematic Vigor ability to, fight on death, can be returned to its unit and then continue to fight. This isn't something that really affects other units, because Celestine could fight on death with a Hallowed Martyr stratagem, or the Abominant could fight on death with their fight on death unit ability. It doesn't affect them because when they are returned, it is at the end of the phase, after any units have fought. They can still be returned to their unit if their unit still exists. The Eldar Seer Council can't teleport a unit around that was just set up from strategic reserves. So if you have a slow-moving unit that doesn't have deep strike, they popped on from the side, you can't teleport them into the middle of the board. Units that have arrived from reserves are excluded from that stratagem. The Imperial Guard Voxcasters have been explained. If you have 2 Voxcasters in the unit, because it's a unit of 20, that doesn't let you roll twice to try and get a command point back when you use a stratagem on the unit. You can't use the Voxcasters when you're using the reinforcement stratagem, because the unit is entirely wiped out and all of the models are gone. And you can't use the reinforcement stratagem on a battle-shocked unit. I always accepted that you couldn't use a stratagem on battle-shocked units and units that died while battle-shocked. But there we have it confirmed. Just as the Imperial Guard can't use multiple Voxcasters at the same time, the Khorne Berserkers and World Eaters Jackals cannot use multiple Icons of Khorne at the same time. As long as you have at least one, you get a bloodshed point if you destroyed an enemy unit. So you can't destroy one unit, have 2 icons, and get 2 bloodshed points. You need to destroy 2 separate units for that to work. And then we have the FAQ about the Hellbrute. That yeah, it can shoot more than once per phase. It can shoot forever. The more you shoot at it, the more it shoots back. You have to be in engagement range already if you want to do a fight attack instead of a shooting attack. You can't pile into engagement range and then fight. You had to already be in engagement range first. If you shoot or fight with the Frenzy ability, that doesn't count as your activation for the unit. They're still eligible to be selected to fight or shoot normally within that turn. And you can shoot in the fight phase and fight in the shooting phase, but that very much depends on the circumstances. If the Hellbrute was shot with Big Guns Never Tire in their shooting phase, which allows them to target a vehicle in engagement range, you can fight with your Hellbrute in the shooting phase. If the enemy fights you, you will probably have to fight back because you can't use Big Guns Never Tire in the fight phase because that's a shooting phase only ability. But if the enemy had a fight on death ability, where they got to fight and then they're removed, your World Eater's Hellbrute is now no longer in engagement range, they can shoot in the fight phase. The Orc Big Mech gets a mention with his shock booster to say, oh yeah, you know how you're teleporting away? You don't need to make desperate escape tests. You don't have fly. but you're moving like you had fly, and if you don't have fly, you would have to take Desperate Escape test, but in this case you don't. We didn't intend that. It's one of the rare orc abilities that always works without popping people's heads at the same time. The Dark Angel's Wrath of the Rock is a really strong detachment. I keep facing it whenever I see a Dark Angels player, cause it's that good. One of their stratagems is Leonine Aggression. This allows you to charge in the enemy charge phase. It's not like Heroic Intervention, it just allows you to declare a charge. So if one of my Genestealer Cult units charge a nearby Dark Angels unit, yeah, they can heroically intervene. If I stood on the opposite side of an objective to them and waved, they can charge in my charge phase. It's a really good stratagem. And there's a little explainer to say, no, you can't charge out of engagement range with one unit to charge another unit. Just like how charging normally works. If you're in engagement range, you don't charge. On the theme of not leaving engagement range, in the very strong Tyrannid Subterranean Assault Detachment, you can't extract units from engagement range and throw them down a tunnel with the Tunnel Network stratagem. And the Morlock does not get to try and eat people when coming out of a tunnel. They have to come from below, open up their mouth, swallow some earth and maybe some people. It can't come out of the big obvious hole in the ground that no one is going to stand over. We have the first update for the Space Wolves, which has things like, yeah, the Head Taker's ability to pick a new target if their quarry is destroyed will also work if they're embarked in a transport. Abilities work while in reserves, but when you're in a transport, you're not in reserves. So this ability now explicitly works while you're in a transport. You will be able to pick a new target, even if you're hiding within a Land Raider at the time. There are a few other minor changes, but I don't have the Space Wolf Codex, so I can't see what the changes really mean. We don't do Space Wolves on this channel. We don't like Space Wolves on this channel. The Imperial agents have an update! It's not a very important one though. It's definitely not an army rule, which they need. It's not a whole redo of the Elimination Blade Force either. Imperial agents in the Imperialis Fleet Detachment have two enhancements. One gives units the ability to infiltrate, one gives units deep strike. This affects attached units and characters that joined those units. If it didn't affect those characters, you couldn't actually infiltrate or deep strike with the unit, because infiltrating and deep striking only work if every model in the unit has that ability, in which case you would have had to pick entirely different units, non-attached units. But it's okay. You can have a Watchmaster with 10 Deathwatch veterans of the Imperial Agents variety infiltrating up the board. Good. Good to know. It doesn't tell us anything about the Imperial Agents Deathwatch in Space Marines, and if that messes with Oath of Moment. For Oath of Moment, you get +1 to wound against your Oath of Moment target, as long as there are no Blood Angels, Space Wolves, Dark Angels, or Deathwatch units in your army. So how does that work for Imperial Agents Deathwatch? They can't use Oath of Moment. So I don't think it should be off their Deathwatch keyword, which is not a faction keyword, whereas it is for the Adeptus Astartes Deathwatch units. But that's up in the air. And there's been no Deathwatch update to explain rules better, because since the start of the edition, there have been fights about characters leading units with mixed toughness. Does the kill team rule on deciding toughness override all of the rules on toughness? Or does it just ignore one of the core rules to say, yeah, you don't just use the highest toughness? But I don't see why it also wouldn't override the core rule on leaders, which says you use the bodyguard's toughness. I don't see why in the kill team rule you would calculate your toughness based entirely on the bodyguard and not attach characters. Surely the kill team rule overrides all rules on toughness from the core rules. But it's not certain. At least their rhinos have always had a firing deck. The Thousand Suns rhino finally gets firing deck 2 like the other rhinos. But if you want things that are weird and different, the Grey Knight Stormstrike missile is different to the Space Marine missile, and that is apparently intentional. The Space Marine version is AP-2 and damage 3, the Grey Knight's version is AP-3 and damage D6 +2. So if you wanted the superior Stormraven, you need to be a Grey Knight player. No mention of the Plasma Cannon, which is D3 shots for the Space Marine version, and flat 3 shots for the Grey Knight's version. Is that one intentional or unintentional? We don't know! Let's assume it was intentional, but Games Workshop perhaps isn't aware there is a difference. As well as the Rhino's firing deck getting confusing for people of the Tzeentch variety, Tzaangors are generally confusing. What are they? Where did they come from? They're an Age of Sigmar thing, that Chaos Beastmen affected by Tzeentch become birdified. Now they're in 40k, where there are no beastmen hiding in the woods. Though there are like abhumans, it doesn't matter. They make no sense in 40k, but they're here and they don't care. Their detachment in the Thousand Suns Codex lets you do some sort of sacrifice. Take some mortal wounds and the enemy is -1 to wound your unit. Or if attacking, take some mortal wounds and you get +1 to the wound roll. Pretty nasty. This previously applied to all Tzeentch mutant units, which is all of the Tzaangors and the Chaos Spawn and the Mutalith Vortex Beast. Apparently the Spawn and the Mutalith Vortex Beast were not meant to be able to get -1 to wound or +1 to wound. Little bit of a whoops. So now the detachment rule only applies to infantry or mounted, the Tzaangor units. And like with the Imperial agents, when you add a character to a unit that's infiltrating, when the whole unit is meant to infiltrate, the character can also infiltrate to allow the infiltration to happen. And the Infernal Master's bolt pistol is actually a pistol. Good for them. Good for them. I'm glad they figured out what a pistol is. Throughout this video, many of the erratas and FAQ changes have been around characters and units. It is always confusing when characters are in units. And the Tournament Companion also needed to clarify something about Cull the Horde, because an attached unit is one unit, apart from when you have killed all the bodyguard models, that is a unit destroyed. The bodyguard unit splits from the characters on death. So if you destroyed all the bodyguard and destroyed all the character models at the same time, that would be 2 units destroyed. So Cull the Horde can get confusing, because it has to have a unit with a starting strength of 13+, that includes attached units. So if you destroy the bodyguard part, but that's only 10 models, that isn't destroying a unit of starting strength 13. So if you destroyed a unit that had 10 cultists and 5 models from a dark commune, that is 15, it's eligible for Cull the Horde. Destroying both parts of it is like you destroyed 2 separate units, neither of which were 13, but this clarifies that if you destroyed the 10 cultists and the 5 dark commune models, that's enough to count as destroying a unit of 13 models. If you only kill the bodyguard part, the 10 cultists, that's not 13 models, so if the dark commune part is still alive, even if you killed 4 of them, you haven't destroyed a unit of 13+ models. But if it was a unit of 16 accursed cultists and a cultist firebrand for a total of 17, and you destroyed just the accursed cultist part, but the cultist firebrand was still alive, you have destroyed a unit of 13+ models. Does that make sense? If your target was an attached unit and you destroy fully enough parts of it to have 13 models destroyed, then you succeed. Boarding actions! Do you remember boarding actions? That has finally got an update. It's been about a year since I released my video on the boarding actions and why it was rather disappointing. That there were lots of problems with the rules and the missions were kind of copied and pasted from the previous edition, from 9th edition's rules. You can have a lot of fun with boarding actions, and I have had a lot of fun with boarding actions, but it's not the most robust rule set. And it's taken a long time to get an FAQ or errata, even on very simple things. The Eldar can only take their Phoenix Lords if they can take the Aspect Warrior of that corresponding Phoenix Lord. So you can take Jain Zar as long as you have some Banshees. You can now take Dark Reapers, so legally you can have Maugan Ra, who was listed as an option, but you were prevented from taking them because you also needed their corresponding Aspect Warriors. As Dark Reapers were not previously available, you couldn't have Maugan Ra, even though it says you could. I'm glad that's getting an update, but it's been nearly a year for a few lines of text. And we get an updated map for the Command Hub mission, which honestly I've never played, but you need to have command consoles on the map because they're part of the mission rules. There were previously no command consoles, and the new map also changes the deployments. So yeah, it's a long time to get very little for boarding actions. I'm glad it's not entirely forgotten, but my video covers more problems with boarding actions that could have been fixed. For as long as there have been drop pods, there have been debates about how you have a drop pod, because the older drop pod model had retractable doors, You can have them down, you can have them up. If they're up, you can't see through it. If they're down, the previous model had gaps all the way through, so you could shoot from one side to the other. Do you want your drop pod blocking line of sight? And is there one set way to have a drop pod? Well, with the new drop pod model, which always has its doors down, we have a designer's note explaining it. Only the middle part of the model is part of the model. The doors are always down, but the doors are not part of the model. You can walk on the doors. The problem, of course, is what about if you're using the older model? That's not really resolved, unless you say, okay, we follow the design template of the new drop pod. Have the doors open or not open, it doesn't really matter. That seems to be the principle. But I'm sure we'll find some way to continue to fight about drop pods. For example, the line of sight is still an issue. If you have the older drop pod model with the doors closed, then you can't see through it. If you have the newer model, there are little gaps so you can see through from one side to the other. Therefore, should you always have the doors open? Well, it's awkward if you have the older model and you've already glued the doors shut. There the fight can continue. Everyone is unhappy. Perfect. This is what we want from any FAQ or errata, for the fight to go on. Standard 40k stuff, in and out of lore. So there have been a lot of changes, with no Games Workshop article announcing that there have been changes. You'll have to check for the changes yourself. There is also a change to some of the base sizes that Games Workshop expects your models to be on. These are not highlighted in red, so you'll have to go through every single model and see if the base size has changed. Again. And they're not all changed, not even all the silly ones. Have you seen this? There are still some incredibly weird base sizes that you want to explore. Enjoy that, and have a great day of 40k.